plans for capping the ends to fill with grout, and what I'll do is put some hot glue in there just to keep this thing in place. If I pull it out, that's what it looks like. So the laser cut piece of wood fits in there nicely. I got the tuck tape on there so the grout won't stick to it, and I also ground down the side here, that way I can wedge it in on an angle and flip it up vertically. That seems to work all right. So it just goes in like that, and then I can put it back, and that way it's recessed, so the bolts holding the CNC to the frame here are down there, and then there's some bolts on the top here that hold the y-axis in place. So this way I'll be able to get access to all those after. I decided for these tubes here, I'm just going to put in the M6 bolts where they exist already, and then deal with making them larger in the future. I don't have any idea of what I want to do with mounting the fixture plate when I make that. So instead of keeping these hollow for now, I'll just fill them in, and then in the future I'll do something. When I do put the mounts on for the fixture plate, what I'll probably do is get some 1/4" steel like this and put the holes in and tap that, and then put some light welds, like some tack welds, and put that on place. I think with the tube being filled with grout, that's going to oppose a lot of the stress from the welding, because like if I put a weld on this side of this tube, it's going to want to bend everything up like that. On this side here, I have 2 welds on each side of this, and they're pulling the tubes evenly on both sides, so I don't have any deformation on the top here. But once I start putting some larger areas for putting bigger threads on, there is a possibility that I'll have issues with that. So having the tube full of grout will probably minimize that to an extent. I'll have to get everything flattened, and what I'll probably do is use the laser level webcam. That whole setup I'd use on the gantry, and use that to adjust the height of all these things, so I can get all of the mounting points for a fixture plate to be all the same. Okay, so holes are put in, and there's 3 for each tube, and my intent is to pour in the center and do the majority of the pour there, and then tap it off on the sides. And I have relief holes between the M6 bolts, so one there. Yeah, so there's a bunch for each tube, and that should help with any of the excess air that's coming out, as well as the water. As the grout expands, it's also pushing all the water out of itself, and the water will start spewing out of those tubes as well. I have capped all the ends with the wood pieces that I made on the laser cutter, and there's the tape on the other side, and I've put them in and held them down with some hot glue. So there's a bit of hot glue just on the perimeter there, on the bottom and on the sides, and that'll help just keep it in place as the grout's expanding and pushing against it. Obviously I took out the 6-inch vise because the weight of that thing is going to push down on the tubes, and I don't want any of that happening. So I want everything just kind of freely standing as it is, and then the grout will solidify it in place. Here's a piece of grout that I've just poured as excess as I'm doing the previous tubes, and this piece it weighs at least 10 pounds, maybe more, maybe 15 pounds, and it's very solid, very strong stuff. So like with the grout, when it solidifies, it's very strong, and like it can retain the shape pretty good. If you're doing molds where you're gonna be making the shape externally and then casting in epoxy and sand or another mineral, that is the way to go for that. I would do that over doing grout, just because the epoxy produces a very hard surface, and that is very abrasion resistant and resistant to chips and stuff. This material, like it is hard, but like you can ding this stuff up, and it's not going to hold up as well as an epoxy based workflow. Go away, fly. So these 3 tubes are done now, and I was gonna try and record some of this, but when you're doing this stuff, like, time is everything. So like, yeah, there was not enough time to get the camera out and try and do all that. So yeah, as you can see, everything's where the main holes are. They're all volcanoing, and all these smaller ones like those and those, you can see that what basically just comes out of those is just water. So as the grout's flowing down, and then, you know, the water, the liquidy part, the water is going to go to the top, and over time it just pushes all the water out of this. So that's what we can see over there and there. Same with over here. Here's a wider shot of everything. I have maybe 30 to 35 kilograms left of grout, and I'm not sure if that's enough for this area here. So it's another day, and I've cleaned off this tube and just checking it out. So giving it a sound test. So right here. And this tube back down here, I checked this one as well. And this one seems to be pretty good. I've not checked this one or cleaned it back there. But right here, so I got the bolt right there, and then I have a hole right here for air to go, and there is a void in here. So I've drilled this hole so I can poke around, and with a little bit of welding rod. So that's how much. Let me just hold it over to a tube here. So if we look past the steel, so there's a pretty good little void there. So what I think I'm going to do is drill this hole up bigger and fill it in. I'm going to leave this bolt in here. I'm not going to touch that. I took it out and then looked around to see if I could see. I could kind of see a bit of something there. So the void might, it's probably around this area, but it is noticeably right there. And you know, it's pretty easy to tell just by the sound. Like over here, this is solid. And on the other side of this bolt, it's totally fine. So I'm gonna make this bigger, not too much, and then I'll just do a localized little pour of grout in there and fill it up. Here's inside the hole, and it's a pretty good sized cavity, so I should be able to just pour in from this hole and fill it in and solve that problem. Bit more. When you tap on it, the hydraulic pressure forces all the grout everywhere. Do something bigger on this side. I'm gonna give this a bit of time, maybe half an hour, and then I'll take off this. Here's the next day, and it's starting to dry out. So there's a bit of a sound happening here. But it's not really much of anything. I'm not going to worry about that. This was a big problem from listening to the sound of it. Here's the one from 2 days ago. This stuff, once it dries, you really need to use like a chisel if you want to shape it and get rid of a high spot. So you can chisel away at it like this. You gotta wear eye protection with this because it's gonna throw everything up in your face. When you're cleaning the surface off, like this stuff here, this stuff comes off very easily because it's just powder, like there's nothing holding it together. But this stuff, once you get into the aggregate, the sand mix, it's really difficult, and like you got to use masonry tools if you want to change the shape of it. Here's a small nugget of it, and this one's got 2 days of drying in it. This stuff takes a long time to dry, so like preferably, from what I read, it takes up to a month for the stuff to fully cure. It's been 2 days. I'll use a chisel and break this one open so we can see what the material looks like on the inside. So there it is. It's mostly, the aggregate is about the size of sand. And you can see there's some larger pieces there that are a little bit bigger than sand. These blobs, they came from the top, so the consistency of the aggregate to all the other material in this is not as you would find it in these tubes. In these tubes, it's like all the sand and the aggregate, it flows to the bottom, and as the expanding happening, it pushes everything out. And then this was one of these chunks that was pushed out of a hole and flowed over the side. So its composition is not exactly the same as this stuff. I scraped out the chip end of all the debris, and I'm just gonna use a mop and clean it all up, make it all nice and new looking. So that's all nice and clean now. I also cleaned the polycarbonate panels, so more light's getting into the machine. A little bit of oil wipe down on things just to oppose some of the rusting, but rust isn't all that bad anyway. Here's the back side. I checked this tube out. This tube sounds fine. There's no hollow spots in this one. The only hollow spot now is a tiny little one beside that one there, and I don't think that's going to be a problem. So what I'll work on now is putting in the vise. I got to figure out if I'm going to put it in this way or if I'm going to rotate at 90 and put it in this way. Getting the bolts off here was mostly alright. Some of them were a little tight, so definitely good to have a bit of grease on those bolts when they go into the grout. Servos are back on, and right now I have to figure out what I'm going to do with the cable. So previously I had the cable going into the tube here, and then it would loop around and then it would go in through this tube here. But now, since everything's full of grout, can't do that. So what I might do is run a tube on the inside of this, and then probably have it wrapped and follow the inside of this tube going out, and then the hole is over there for all the cables. So I was planning on putting grout in this tube that goes all the way around here, around the perimeter, but unfortunately the locking mechanism over here, I can't take that off because it's welded in place. It was originally a temporary mechanism to hold the door down, but Yeah, so what I'm going to do is delay putting that in until I get further along with the stainless steel skirt that goes over this, because I'll have to change the locking mechanism anyway, and probably have it on the outside here on this face. So I will look at doing the grout in that tube then. In the meantime, I'm working on getting the vise properly secured down, and what I'm doing for that is I have two pieces of steel and they go along this axis right here. That's why I got the magnets hooking them up, and I have these steel metal pucks that look like this, and this is M12 threads. So these are going to go on the inside of the tube, and I'm going to weld probably 4 points of contact through some smaller drill holes on the top of this, and then that's going to hold them in place and stop them from twisting as the bolt locks down. And then I'll have corresponding holes on the side of the vise to hold them in place. 4 points of contact on each side, and that should hold that vise in really good. I decided to go with something like this over a bolt because this is going to give me a lot bigger surface contact onto the steel tube, and that way the forces of the vise vibrating and stuff, it's got more surface area to go into the tube. And this would have been great if I had a metal lathe to make this on. So instead what I did was I etched out the circle, used my chop saw to roughly cut it in, and then combination of grinding it to get closer, and then I had a smaller hole in here for a M6 bolt, and I had a hole in there just the same size, so I could put it on the drill press and then run the grinder on it to get a little bit nicer surface. And yeah, I'm left with this little puck. After I took it off the drill press, I drilled it out and then tapped it to M12. Here's one of the steel profiles. This is 1/8 inch, and I still gotta drill this out a little bigger. And my intent is I'm gonna fill this thing with grout, just like everything else. I'm gonna do it vertically on its own first, like so. So pour it in and have it settle out. I'm not gonna go all the way up, so I'm gonna leave maybe an inch or so on each side, maybe even more than that. And after I have it done, I'm gonna weld it in place, both of them, onto those two white steel tubes. And then after that, I'm gonna fill in the joint with more grout. So just to top it off, that way I can have a very tight connection of grout between the side of this tube and the grout that's on that tube. That way there's more point of contact of grout, and it's not possible that this section of tube could be having any vibration in it. Originally for this, I was going to drill out a hole slightly bigger than this and then weld this into place and have it raised up a bit. So like maybe a millimeter or so. It's hard to see, it's all blurry. But instead of that, I'm just gonna have it inside the tube like so. And then I'll put 4 holes in there, and then I'll TIG weld those so this puck is locked in place. This is roughly where the 2 tubes are going to go. So a little bit off from the center, and that still gives me enough room to access the primary area of the vise on the machine. The fit up here is pretty tight, so there's not much possibility of the white tubes from shrinking in and bending this direction. The welds I'm going to put on are on the sides, so on each side. I'm not putting any welds on the top or the bottom. Well, the bottom is just not accessible, and if I put one on the top, it's gonna unevenly pull it in that direction. And I don't want to change any of the geometry of the top surface. By putting the welds on the sides, all I'm doing is changing possibly the shape of the Y tubes, and they might get sucked in this way, and that's totally fine for what I'm doing here. The bed here is not perfectly level. Like whenever I put a vise or anything on this, I have to shim it in and tram it in for the rest of the machine. Found this washer which is slightly smaller, and I've used that to scribe in and then punch in some locating holes where I'm going to put small little holes where I'm going to do the actual welding. So 4 little TIG spots to keep this in place underneath it. And the holes are far enough away and they're on the perimeter where there's no chance it's going to have any effect on the threads or anything. So these are just pilot holes. I'm gonna make these bigger, but I just wanna get a good position, get them a little bit more accurate. I removed the last bit of mill scale on these just so when I'm welding them in there's no chance of any porosity popping up and rearing its ugly face. So nice and shiny now. The tubes here, I cleaned them up as well where I'm going to weld. So I'm not welding on the bottom here, only the sides. That's how I'm going to attach it, and then also I got to weld in the holes there. And the way this will look is something like that. So you can see there's the edge of each one, and I'm gonna get in there and TIG weld and fill those little holes in, and then that'll keep this puck nice and firmly fastened in there. I'm gonna expand this hole out a little bit and see if I can put a nicer chamfer with the step drill. Just getting ready to weld, and I'm going to hold the puck in place with a small chunk of aluminum and some washers, and so that's how it's going to look. And yeah, start the welding now. Here's after welding. So because I have a washer over top of this thing, I couldn't see the center, so I lost concentricity. And it looks like stuff like this is because of oil, so some oil was left in there. So I'll have to mark it, but I'm gonna grind all the stuff flat now. You can see how it protrudes out a little bit. So I'm gonna clean it up, grind all flat, and then these are ready. That's how they look. Simple as that. So I'm waiting on delivery for bolts for this, so it's gonna be a few days. So what I'll do is I'll end the video here, and next time I'll continue on and finishing up all this and getting the vise installed. See you guys next time.